Every year on her birthday, her father would give Eugénie a gold coin, but he never allowed her to buy anything with it, so she could only keep it at home like a useless ornament. Because she had grown up in a dark, damp house, wearing rough cloth and eating simple meals, Eugénie naturally believed that her family was not wealthy. To save money, her father even personally measured out the portions for every meal, and the cupboard that stored the food was locked by him, with the only key kept in his hand, and Eugénie had never questioned his ways. The obedient girl would sit by the window with her mother during the day, using the outside light to mend old clothes, and no matter how dim the room became, the mother and daughter would never waste a single candle before sunset. During the day, the only light came from that window, and at night, the books in her hands became the only passage connecting Eugénie to the outside world. However, whenever her father Grandet saw the faint candlelight through the crack of the door, no matter how late it was, he would push open her door and tell her that a girl should not read at night because it could easily damage her eyes. Eugénie knew very well that although her father sounded as if he cared about her, what truly pained him was the candle being burned away little by little. She had long grown used to her father's frugality, because she believed it was not easy for him to earn money outside. But how could she have imagined that her father Grandet was actually the richest and most respected merchant in the entire district, with total assets already reaching more than 10 million francs. Although Grandet was a shrewd and successful financial expert, he was also a complete miser. His stinginess was not only toward his wife and daughter, but even toward himself. The family of three lived in a house that had been neglected for years, and even in the freezing depths of winter, he could not bear to light a fire for warmth. The maid at home was the only thing that made them different from the poor. But in a family like this, the maid had to do far more hard labor than maids in other households, because Grandet wanted to squeeze value out of everything, and he would never allow her to take wages for nothing. In this environment, Eugénie was like a caged canary, never resisting her father's authority. If not for the appearance of one man, perhaps she would have been trapped here forever, and the emotions and rebellious desires buried deep in her heart would never have awakened. That day happened to be Eugénie's 20th birthday, and her father once again gave her a gold coin as he had done in previous years, with no other gift besides it. By contrast, the invited notary and banker brought generous presents. Rather than saying they were eagerly flattering Grandet, it was more accurate to say they were paving the way for their own son or nephew, because whoever married Eugénie, the female heir, would be making a deal with enormous returns. However, just as everyone was laughing and chatting at the dining table, a sudden and urgent knocking came from outside the front door. After the maid opened the door, a young man soaked by the rain and looking utterly miserable appeared before everyone, and this young man was Charles. Charles took out a handwritten letter from his father and handed it to his uncle Grandet, and only then did Grandet learn that his younger brother, who was far away in Paris doing wine business, had gone bankrupt. Grandet's younger brother had once been a famous wine merchant in Paris, but because of poor management, he had fallen deeply into debt, and even the property he lived in had already been mortgaged. It was not that he had never considered asking his elder brother for help, but when he thought that Grandet was only a grape-growing farmer whose yearly income would not even cover the interest he owed, he ultimately never opened his mouth to ask. He sent his son Charles back to his hometown for the time being, to seek out his uncle Grandet, whom he had never met. Once the debt crisis on his side was resolved, he would naturally notify him to return. Charles had been used to a life of luxury since childhood, knew nothing about business, and was a complete spoiled young man. He only worried about whether country life would be boring, never imagining that this would be the final meeting between father and son. Charles's arrival did not cause the slightest change on Grandet's face, as if this was a stranger who had nothing to do with him. By contrast, Eugénie paid special attention to this cousin from Paris, and her gaze was involuntarily drawn to him. That night, when her mother and the maid helped Charles prepare the guest room, Eugénie also followed them over to help. After placing enough firewood in the fireplace, she found a brand new candle from under the bed, and finally she did not forget to ask the maid to dry the damp sheets with heat, all just to make Charles, this city gentleman, live more comfortably. When Grandet saw this, he quietly warned the maid, then left with a belly full of anger, feeling physical pain at the thought of the firewood and candle already burned away. After he left, Charles looked around the shabby house and could not believe that the uncle his father once said had been a mayor would live in a place like a slum. That night, not only did Charles sleep uneasily, but Eugénie, who lived downstairs from him, also almost did not close her eyes all night, because as soon as she closed her eyes, Charles's graceful and elegant appearance would clearly emerge before her. Early the next morning, Eugénie hurried to the kitchen and urged the maid to make some fresh cream. simply because she had learned from the newspaper that young people in Paris liked that flavor very much. The maid told Eugénie with a serious expression that it was completely impossible to dress this home up as elegantly as Paris. Her blunt words instantly shattered Eugénie's fantasy, because she sadly realized that it was not only this home, but even she herself was far from true elegance. Before Eugénie's disappointment had faded, her father Grandet appeared in the kitchen on time like a precise clock, using his key to open the lock on the cupboard, and even though there was a guest from afar at home, the bread he took out was still as poor and meager as usual, without the slightest intention of adding anything extra. The maid was dissatisfied about this, but she did not dare say much, and only helplessly said that she would go to the market later to buy meat and hoped she could take some money. However, Grandet actually said something shocking, that they could go outside and catch a few crows to make meat soup, and that dish would be enough to serve his nephew. Her father's behavior made Eugénie feel a burst of shame so strong that she wished she could disappear, but years of repression had taught her to hide every emotion, and her face remained calm and still, without the slightest ripple visible. Grandet's sharp eyes caught his daughter's low mood, but he did not comfort her, and instead told her to go out with him to inspect the poplar woods that could bring wealth. In his eyes, nothing could lift the spirit more than personally witnessing his own property. Eugénie knew nothing about business matters, and the conversation between her father and the notary about harvests and money was only a blur of noise to her. She stood far away from the two men and automatically blocked out the noisy sound, leaving only the wind and bursts of birdsong by her ears. At this moment, Grandet was discussing with the notary and decided to sell all the poplar trees on this land, then use it to grow grass. A poplar tree had a growth cycle of 40 years, while grass could be harvested twice a year, and after calculation, it could actually earn an extra 1,200 francs every year, which would be 48,000 francs over 40 years. The interest earned from saving this money alone would already become an astonishing fortune. After hearing his plan, the notary was stunned and sincerely admired his incredibly shrewd mind. However, Charles's arrival still rang an alarm bell for the notary, who feared that Eugénie would be taken away by this young man from Paris, because almost every unmarried young man in town wanted to marry this female heir, including his own son. He tried to indirectly draw information about Charles from Grandet's mouth, but he underestimated Grandet's sharpness. Grandet almost immediately guessed his intention.
Vous m'avez donc accompagné de si bonne heure pour me tirer les verres du nez, vous voyez. Alors vous n'allez pas être déçu. Je préférerais jeter ma fille à la Loire que de la donner à son cousin. Vous pouvez annoncer cela ou laisser jaser le monde comme il vous plaira.
However, Grandet not only refused to let his daughter marry the person she liked, but also refused to let her marry anyone else, because marrying off a daughter meant spending a large dowry, and to him, that was more painful than taking his life. Eugénie was like a soulless puppet, numbly performing a life already arranged under her father's control. For many years, she had locked away her true self, never easily showing joy, anger, sorrow, or happiness. Yet when she learned that her uncle in Paris had ended his own life, she broke down in tears.
Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire de pleurer comme ça? Tu ne connaissais pas ton oncle.
Grandet felt no trace of sadness over his own brother's passing, and instead wanted to send his penniless nephew away to distant America. Before leaving home, he warned Eugénie not to tell Charles the news for the time being. After waking up, Charles did not know that his father was gone, nor did he know that his own fate was about to be rewritten, and he even wanted to watch a stage performance to pass the time. In a small place like this, of course, no theater existed, but Eugénie volunteered to take him to experience the natural scenery of the countryside. The two came together to the edge of the woods where Eugénie often went, and although the leaves had long been blown away by the cold wind, the mottled trunks stood in the wind and echoed with the howling gusts, creating a bleak and chilly beauty of their own. When he learned that Eugénie had never left her hometown, Charles promised that one day he would take her to Paris, to see the place everyone said had the most beautiful spring. It was not that Eugénie did not yearn for the prosperity of the city, but on one hand, she loved being in nature, which brought peace and calm, and on the other hand, she knew very well that her father would never allow her to leave this place. Sure enough, when the two returned from outside together, Grandet already looked displeased and scolded his daughter for leaving the house when her chores were not done. After speaking, he called Charles alone into the kitchen and told him the terrible news about his father's death. To seize his nephew's property, Grandet actually decided to send him to another country and falsely claimed that he would help repay the foreign debts left by his father. Grandet advised Charles not to be too sad, because a person's bankruptcy had already brought shame upon the family, and now that his father had chosen to leave the world while leaving behind huge debts, It was undoubtedly an even greater disgrace. Ignoring the grief on his nephew's face, Grandet actually announced at lunch that he would hold a dinner party tomorrow and invite both the notary's family and the banker's family.
Mais en 25 ans de mariage, tu n'as organisé que 2 dîners à la maison?
Eh bien, c'est qu'il en fallait un troisième.
Eugénie had no time to care about the purpose of her father's dinner party, because her entire heart was now with Charles, and she did not know how to comfort him while he was shut inside his room. From her daughter's concerned expression and tone, her mother had already seen that she had fallen deeply in love, but she also knew that her husband would absolutely never agree to this marriage. That afternoon, when Grandet returned from outside, his wife took the initiative to mention making several pieces of mourning clothing, because according to custom, they had to observe mourning for his younger brother. At first, it had been agreed that they would wear black veils to mourn his younger brother, but in the end, Grandet would not even allow black veils, only because after thinking about it all night, he still believed that his brother's heavy debts were a disgrace. The next day, the third dinner party in this household finally began, and this was also the first meal in which Charles had eaten meat since arriving here, but he had no appetite at all. Grandet acted as if he could not see his nephew's sadness and told the notary and the banker that he needed to find a way to protect his nephew's family property without spending a single coin, while also protecting the reputation of the entire family. At this stage, all of Grandet's younger brother's remaining assets had been frozen, and the debts could only be settled after everything was sold. During this period, the Grandet family needed to appoint someone to go to Paris and communicate with the creditors there, and the person chosen was the banker he trusted. And the reason Grandet did not go himself was simply that he did not want to waste extra money. The banker also carried another task, which was to buy back the 2,000 barrels of wine belonging to Charles's father from the creditors at a low price. Earlier, 2 foreign merchants had come to town to purchase wine and offered 150 francs per barrel, but in order to make more money for himself, Grandet actually set his sights on his own nephew. In private, he raised the price to 175 francs per barrel for the 200 barrels in his own warehouse, while the remaining 2,000 barrels would be only 125 francs per barrel. At this moment, Charles had no idea that his uncle would actually take advantage of him, and he was imagining with Eugénie how he would start from nothing in America. He truly wanted to stay, but seeing how difficult their family's life seemed, he still decided not to add trouble for them. Grandet had said before that he would go to Nantes to sell the few gold coins in his possession and take Charles to the port there along the way, after which Charles would have to go to America by himself.
Alors je pars. Je pars parce que je n'ai plus rien à vous offrir.
Il vous reste l'essentiel pourtant.
After Eugénie returned from outside, she was once again scolded by her father, who blamed her for going out alone with Charles and causing rumors to spread everywhere. Fortunately, they would set off tomorrow, and these rumors would gradually fade away after Charles left. Grandet asked his daughter to take out all of her gold coins, because this was the best time to sell them, and tomorrow he would sell every one of them.
Vous n'allez rien donner à mon cousin pour son long voyage?
Si, des conseils.
Seeing the disappointment on Charles's face, Eugénie suddenly felt a sharp pain in her heart, never expecting that her father did not plan to give Charles even a single coin. In the silence of the deep night, she quietly pushed open Charles's door and handed him all the gold coins she had saved over the years. Eugénie knew that she would never use them in her life, but they could solve his urgent need and prevent him from going hungry and cold on the road. Charles had nothing to give in return, so he could only leave her the portrait of his mother, which he treasured deeply, as an eternal keepsake. When their feelings reached their deepest point, the two young people forgot everything and held each other tightly. In that overwhelming moment of passion, Eugénie also gave him her entire heart and self. Before leaving the next day, her father asked her why she had not brought over the gold coins, and for the first time in her life, Eugénie lied to her father, saying that she had used them for an investment, but when asked where exactly she had invested them, she refused to say a word. Although Grandet could not ask out the whereabouts of the gold coins, her mother still guessed from her daughter's reluctant face that she must have given the coins to Charles. Soon, 2 weeks passed, and when Grandet returned home, the first thing he did was settle accounts with his daughter. When he saw the portrait of Charles's late mother on the cabinet, he angrily dragged his daughter to the church and told her to properly confess there and tell the truth. Grandet questioned Eugénie, asking whether the gold coins had been given to that poor boy Charles.
J'ai investi dans ces entreprises.
Dans ces entreprises? Mais que sais-tu de l'investissement, toi qui n'es qu'une femme? Toi qui as donné ton nom à ce type que tu ne reverras jamais de l'or en échange du portrait d'une morte?
Grandet furiously cursed his daughter as a disaster, saying she had actually given the gold coins he had worked so hard to earn to a useless man. No matter how harshly her father scolded her, Eugénie remained silent, stubbornly refusing to say a single word. She firmly believed that Charles would one day return home in glory, and in the warmth of spring, he would take her to Paris to see the great city she had never seen. But she never expected that after returning home, her father would lock her in her room, where she could only eat hard, dry bread and drink cold well water every day. For a full 2 months, she was trapped in that cramped space like a prisoner, her eyes empty as if her soul might leave her body at any moment. It was during this period that Eugénie's mother suddenly developed a high fever that would not subside, and her entire body became so weak that she could only lie in bed. She begged her husband to forgive their daughter and let her out, but Grandet was stubborn and would not listen at all, because his wife was bedridden and his daughter was locked in her room. This was the first time in 21 years that Grandet ate alone, and even the maid could not bear to watch it, bluntly saying that this was a tragedy. But what she meant was not that Grandet had a wife and daughter yet lived like a widower, but that even when his wife was this ill, he still would not call a doctor, believing that doctors were all useless people who tricked others out of money. Just like that, Eugénie's mother endured the high fever for 3 days, and in the end, her body could no longer hold on, and only then did Grandet allow Eugénie to leave her room.
Quand je serai partie, il tentera la réconciliation. Ne la lui accorde pas à n'importe quel prix.
Eugénie tightly held her mother's hand, unable to believe that she was about to leave her. Yet while his wife was in her final moments, Grandet not only failed to stay by her side, but instead went to find the notary. He did this only because he did not want his daughter to inherit her mother's share of the property after his wife passed away. The notary gave him advice, saying that as long as he coaxed Eugénie into voluntarily giving up her inheritance and handing the share of property under her name over to her father to manage, everything could be solved. After returning home, Grandet indeed showed a kindness he had never shown before. He told Eugénie that from now on, she was completely free, and he even took her to his wife and admitted in front of her that he had forgiven their daughter. It was not that Eugénie could not see her father's hypocrisy, but after her mother's funeral, she still signed the document giving up the inheritance from her mother, only because she knew that she would never be able to leave this place, and her father would never allow her to marry. Since Charles left and her mother passed away, she had already spent a full 5 years in a life that never changed. During this time, apart from mending clothes and folding sheets, she only stared blankly out through that window, living exactly the kind of life her father wanted her to live.
Une vie où il se passe rien, qui se passe pour rien. Tout est immobile. Où il est de bon ton de ne rien attendre pour une femme si ce n'est la volonté des hommes, de tous les hommes. Comme le disait justement ma bonne mère que vous avez tuée. Il y a grand avantage à cela pour une femme. On voit arriver la mort comme un soulagement. Alors que vous...
Grandet said without even raising his head that she should go to church and repent for those words. However, Eugénie coldly said that the true God was not in church, nor in the rules men created to bind women into obedience. If he still had even a trace of reason left, he would surely be able to overcome his endless greed. Grandet casually said that many ships had met disasters in the Caribbean, and even if someone survived by chance, they might still lose their life to cholera. Charles must have been gone long ago, otherwise there would be no reason for him not to write to anyone. Her father's analysis instantly made Eugénie's eyes sting with tears, and the last hope in her heart began to collapse little by little. Over the years, in order to avoid paying a dowry, her father truly had not allowed her to marry, and Eugénie had obediently chosen not to resist, only waiting for Charles to return, just as she had lost all hope and decided to imprison herself in this old house for the rest of her life. Her father suddenly suffered a stroke and passed away before he could leave a single final word. Only after her father's death did Eugénie finally learn that her family was actually the wealthiest family in the entire district. The notary organized all of Grandet's inheritance, including a castle covering 300 acres, an estate, 8 farms, and a rental building in Paris. There were also 200 acres of vineyards along the Loire River, as well as stocks and gold worth 2 million francs, with the total value reaching as high as 17,550,880 francs. Of course, the notary hoped that Eugénie would choose his own son, but he also knew that she had always been waiting for Charles to return. With hidden motives, he revealed a shocking piece of news, that Charles was still alive. However, he was in Paris preparing to marry the daughter of a certain count, and Charles's current difficulty was that his father's creditors were demanding that the son repay the father's debts. Only at this moment did Eugénie realize that her own father had not repaid that debt back then, but had even gained a great deal from it. Charles's future father-in-law, the Count, did not agree to let his daughter marry a man burdened with heavy debts, unless Charles could pay off everything he owed. After hearing this, Eugénie returned home without saying a word, and a certain plan had already formed in her heart. She raised the 900 francs pension her father had left to the maid to 1800 francs, and also gave her a farmhouse as a gift. And after giving these instructions, she set off for Paris overnight. It was the first time she had left the small town where she had lived for more than 20 years. The prosperity of Paris was indeed just as Charles had described, but Eugénie had no mind to admire it, and instead went straight to find the man she had deeply loved.
Ma cousine, j'allais justement vous écrire.
To avoid being discovered by his fiancée, Charles hurriedly took Eugénie into the study. Eugénie suppressed the overwhelming longing in her heart and returned his mother's portrait to him. At this moment, Charles still thought Eugénie knew nothing, and falsely claimed that marrying into the Count's family was necessary to repay his father's 2 million francs of debt. Eugénie coldly interrupted him and told him that she not only understood everything, but would also help him repay that money.
De votre poche. Je croyais que vous étiez pauvre.
Je le croyais aussi. Jusqu'à la mort de mon père qui a révélé une fortune immense.
When he learned that she was now one of the richest women around, Charles suddenly changed his attitude completely, no longer respectfully calling her cousin, but saying that he had truly loved her. However, by now, Eugénie had completely seen through this man and did not allow herself to keep sinking any deeper. Before leaving, she told Charles not to marry into the Count's family, because he was the only male heir of the Grandet family, and he had to carry on the family name. After saying this, she left without the slightest attachment, turned around, and set off back to her hometown that very day. After returning, she went to find the notary and, ignoring his attempts to stop her, donated 2/3 of the family fortune to charity without the slightest reluctance. At this moment, Eugénie was no longer the canary locked inside a cage, and she wanted to travel outside, broaden her vision, and become an eagle soaring across the sky. Perhaps one day, when she felt tired in some distant place, she would still return to this small town where she had lived for more than 20 years, but she firmly believed that by then, she would already have been reborn, and would finally begin a hopeful and extraordinary life in a completely new form.